Well, take it from someone who's been there and done that. At some point in your 20s and 30s, you're going to sit down and start to wonder if you want to have children, and if so, when you should do it. Now, there are a lot of online articles and quizzes about how to tell you when you're mentally and emotionally prepared to have kids, and much of it geared towards mothers, which is also weird, as this whole parenting thing is a tango for two. But anyway, before I had my daughter, I'd read a ton of these, and what I didn't read enough of, and I'll admit, were articles on how to tell if you're indeed financially ready for children. Well, Anelisa, or Lisa I should say, MT, advisory partner at Citadel, is on the line to share some advice with us. Lisa, welcome to the show.
Hi, Michael. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Now, in the almost 5 years since the birth of my first daughter, I now have two, I've learned that the things I thought would cost a lot of money, setting up the nursery and those kinds of things, are actually rather inexpensive. But the things I never even thought about, like fruit and vegetable squeeze pouches and nappies, cost an awful lot of money. How do newly expectant parents tend to approach the joy and sometimes sleepless nights of childhood? Parenthood, I should say.
So I think we always kind of think whenever people are expecting children, you think of the big things, the sleepless nights. You also think of the big expenses, having to purchase new furniture, for example. But there's other small things that we don't take into consideration until the baby does finally arrive, and then all of a sudden, it's a whole lifestyle change that you weren't prepared for.
Now, a good place to start, if we're looking for a checklist on what you need to consider as part of your financial planning, surely must be an emergency fund. That's the first thing that you should be giving birth to, surely.
Well, it's nice to have that emergency fund for like those big ticket items, like having to redo a nursery and everything else. But you also need to, one of the important parts that you do need to look at is just your living expenses, because now you need to take into account that once baby arrives, then your lifestyle expenses are going to change significantly. So month to month, your budget is going to look much different after that 9-month period.
A lot different, and it's not just the question of buying pouches of food and nappies and all those other things you're not used to spending money on, but it's also the lifestyle changes that it brings about, and where you might have to start cutting back. So I think planning that budget well ahead of time to get used to it will be a big help. Medical expenses are the other one that I think we are sort of aware of, because you've got to plan the birth. But post that, there are all types of medical expenses, so ensure that you've got good medical cover, I think, is a good tip.
Yeah, so it's nice to kind of have a look at your medical cover, because you do know that there are expenses that come up while pregnant, but then now you also need to think about after the baby arrives, you have additional amounts to your medical premium, as well as your medical savings might have been enough when you didn't have a baby, but now you need to take into account that there's an additional person that you need to cater for.
And then there's the education fund. We know that we need to start planning that probably before we even think we're going to have children. But what's good to bear in mind when it comes to establishing an education policy?
So you have different options. So you don't need to necessarily just look at an education policy. So you could look at a discretionary investment, which is something that you can start putting a bit of money into. So, you can consider a tax-free savings plan. You can also consider just a normal investment plan, but you know that money is earmarked for the children's schooling expenses. But another thing that goes with education is not just the cost of going to school, but now you need to look at extramural activities that come out from that. You need to consider camping, that the child might need camping. If your child is very into sports, there's going to be sports trips. If your child needs extra tutoring, then that's going to also need to be factored in educational-wise.
Well, I think a good rule of thumb when it comes to children is always add on another 0, maybe even 2, depending on what you're looking at. That was Anelisa, MT, advisory partner at Citadel.